The forest was silent, the kind of silence that carries weight heavy with unseen eyes. Rain slid from the pine needles, dripping onto bronze helmets dulled by mud. The legions of Rome, the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th trudged forward, their formation bending through the trees like a wounded serpent. They had marched for days far from the Rhine, far from safety. Each step deeper into Germania felt less like a march and more like a burial procession. The path beneath their sandals had dissolved into black muck. Shields sank into the earth, horses stumbled. Yet still they pressed onward, soldiers of the mightiest empire the world had ever known, obeying the will of their commander, Publius Quinctilius Varus. Varus, a man of law and order, not of war. He had been sent to bring Rome's justice to the wild north, to civilize what could not be tamed. He believed the tribes were broken, subdued, loyal. And beside him rode the man who had made that loyalty possible, a Germanic noble who had worn the armor of Rome since boyhood. Arminius, he was admired, even trusted by every Roman officer in the column. The emperor himself had honored him. They saw in him a bridge between two worlds, a son of Germania who had become a knight of Rome. But Arminius saw something else. A dream, or perhaps a curse, of a land free of Roman rule. A land where the old gods still whispered from oak and stone. And now those whispers had become a voice calling him home. The road narrowed, the canopy above thickened. Orders echoed faintly through the mist, commands barely heard before they vanished into the roar of the wind. Close the ranks, keep formation. But formation was impossible here. The terrain twisted and broke like the roots beneath their feet. The Romans were no longer an army, they were a column of ghosts swallowed by fog. Behind them, supply wagons groaned under the weight of provisions and families. Ahead, Arminius rode out of sight, claiming he would summon reinforcements from the allied tribes. Varus nodded. He trusted him as one trusts the sunrise because Rome's power, he thought, could not be betrayed. As Arminius disappeared into the fog, a centurion muttered under his breath. We've seen no friendly tribe in days, only trees that move when the wind stops. Varus did not hear, or perhaps he chose not to. His thoughts were on his orders, on maps drawn by men who had never seen this place. To the Romans, this was Germania, an unclaimed province, waiting for law and taxation. To the tribes, it was sacred ground, the lungs of the gods. As night approached, the campfires flickered against the darkness, weak and uncertain. The men huddled under makeshift shelters, armor rusting, spirit sinking. Some whispered that the gods were watching, others that the gods had already turned away. A young legionary wrote by torchlight, his letter half finished. Dearest Livia, the forest here never ends, it listens. I dream of open sky and stone streets, but all I see are trees and shadows that move when I close my eyes. Far to the north, Arminius met with the tribal chieftains of the Cherusci, Bructeri, and Marsi. Beneath the lightning-lit sky, they gathered around a single fire, men who had once fought each other, now bound by a single oath to destroy Rome. The rain masked their voices, but not their rage. Each man knew the stakes, their lands, their gods, their very names had been stripped away by empire. Tonight, they would take them back. Arminius raised his sword toward the heavens. Tonight, the forest will remember us. Back in the Roman camp, Varus lay awake, staring into the smoke of his dying fire. His legate, Numonius Valla, urged him to turn back to regroup near the Rhine. Varus refused. We are Rome, he said quietly, and Rome does not retreat from barbarians and rain. But the rain would not stop. The forest had no pity for empire. In the shadows, unseen beyond the tree line, figures moved, barefoot, silent, carrying spears wrapped in leather to muffle their clatter. They watched the campfires fade, waiting for the right moment. And as the final torch flickered out, the forest exhaled. The storm was coming. By dawn, the rain had become a flood. The Roman columns stretched for miles, snaking through the valleys of the calcareous hills, a terrain they had never mapped, where the forest rose like walls on either side. Varus rode near the center, unaware that his army was now walking straight into a trap that had been months in the making. Arminius had vanished into the fog hours earlier. To Varus, it seemed routine, a trusted ally gathering tribal reinforcements. But in the hills above, the truth unfolded. Hidden among the trees, thousands of warriors waited, Cherusci, Bructeri, Chatti, and Marsi, united under Arminius's command. They wore no armor, only furs and mud. Their faces were painted black with ash. In the rain, they were almost invisible. They had dismantled the Roman-built roads, cut the escape paths, and weakened the bridges. Every tree was marked, every ravine prepared. The forest itself had been turned into a weapon. The first sign came as a shout from the vanguard, a crash of timber and a scream. Trees, chopped and bound the night before, came crashing down across the Roman road, crushing wagons and men beneath them. Then came the storm of spears. They fell like rain, whistling through fog, striking shields, flesh, and horse alike. The disciplined formation of Rome dissolved into chaos. Legionaries scrambled for cover, slipping in the mud, colliding with supply carts. Officers shouted orders no one could hear. The fog swallowed their voices. From the tree line erupted the tribes, hundreds at first, then thousands, screaming war cries older than Rome itself. They struck the column's flanks, vanishing back into the forest after each kill. Varus's cavalry tried to counter, but their horses floundered in the swampy soil. Discipline became panic. Shield walls broke. The standard of the 17th Legion fell, trampled in the mud. Somewhere in the chaos, Varus called for Arminius, but the only answer came from the forest. A horn deep, guttural, and unending. It was the sound of betrayal, of Rome's faith breaking beneath the weight of its own arrogance. Arminius appeared at last, emerging through the mist on horseback, his Roman cloak gone, his face painted for war. He looked down upon the chaos, and for the first time he smiled. To his men, he shouted in his native tongue, "The forest remembers its children." And the trees answered with screams. The Romans tried to reform their lines, but the rain turned the ground to clay. Their shields slipped in their hands. Arrows and stones rained down from above. Legate Pneumonius Valla attempted to break through with the cavalry, but the slope gave way beneath their charge, swallowing horse and rider into the mire. By evening, what had begun as a march became a massacre. The forest floor was a river of blood and rainwater. The legions were dying not in battle, but in panic, destroyed by the very landscape they sought to command. Night fell over the forest. Fires burned where wagons had overturned. Survivors huddled under shields, listening to the rain and the cries of the wounded. Varus sat motionless beside a ruined chariot. He knew the truth now. Arminius had betrayed them, the legions were lost, and the empire's pride would drown in German mud. He drew his sword not for battle but for honor. History would remember that the commander of 3 legions took his own life rather than face capture. The torch of Rome was extinguished, deep in the forest that no Roman would ever tame again. When dawn peeled back the last layer of mist, the forest revealed its work. Shields lay half-buried in clay. Standards, once proud and upright, sagged by their poles like drowned reeds. The river of red that had cut the earth the night before had slowed to a glassy sheen. The survivors moved like ghosts, handfuls of men dragging limbs, clutching broken spears, eyes glazed with shock. They had no voice for the scale of what had happened. They only had memory and the cold, wet ground beneath them. In small clusters, centurions counted the broken, names, faces, histories wiped out in a single night. The 19th's eagle was missing. The 17th and 18th were no more than scattered memories and torn standards. Those who could move gathered what they could salvage: a spear, a shield, a scrap of leather. Some tried to bury the dead where they lay, but the ground was too waterlogged. The trees drank the bodies as though the forest would not let them go. In the weeks after, scavengers came: wolves, foxes, ravens, taking what Rome had left behind. Where men had slept, animals made nests. The forest that had witnessed the slaughter became a new kind of tomb, alive and indifferent. Some survivors staggered westward, carrying tales that would not be believed. Others were captured and slaughtered. Few reached the Rhine to tell the full story. Those who did arrived shaken, scarred not only in body but in hope. When the news reached Rome, the city reeled. Augustus paced the palaces, his face ashen. He had built an order he believed unassailable. Now 3 legions were gone, fathers, sons, and veterans, devoured by a land he had always intended to own. He would not let the shock stand. The emperor raised a cold, bureaucratic fury. Legions repositioned, generals replaced, fortifications hardened. The dream of Rome's expansion beyond the Rhine did not die that week, but it changed, from conquest to containment, from dominion to caution. In the following months, Rome demanded answers. Who had failed? Who had plotted? Varus became a name to curse and to mourn. Tribunals convened, blame was cast. But some of the blame lay in a truth Rome could not easily accept. The forest had not been a passive backdrop. It had been shaped by men who loved it, who knew its whispers and turns, and who chose for a night to become its voice. Arminius did not ride into Rome's forums. He returned to his people like a shadow who had become a memory, hailed as liberator, yet uneasy in victory. For the tribes, the slaughter had been a reclamation. For Arminius, it was proof that the North could be united against a single enemy. Yet unity among tribes is brittle. Old feuds and ambitions resurfaced when the immediate danger faded. Within a few years, Arminius would be murdered by rival chieftains. The very bargains he had brokered turned against him. His fate was a reminder that history does not enshrine saviors for long. It makes them into stories and stories into warnings. The Roman Empire learned the hard lesson of humility. The Rhine became a frontier in the full sense, not an immediate stepping stone to more provinces, but a line to defend. Forts rose along its banks, diplomatic ties and alliances were reworked. The empire's northward dream was not dead, but it was transformed into a policy of endurance rather than explosive expansion. In the long arc of history, the Teutoburg disaster was a hinge. It slowed Romanization, preserved Germanic cultures for centuries, and helped shape the map of Europe itself. A lost legion became in time the seed of 1,000 stories. Centuries later, men would stand in the clearing and read the bones of the past. Archaeologists would unearth twisted iron, shattered plates, and the occasional signet ring. They would measure the soil and find where columns had fallen. They would add names to lists and find in those shards a human truth, that even the greatest empires can be undone by the knowledge and will of those they sought to bend. Arminius' victory did not end Rome, it merely altered its pace. The world that emerged was shaped by that rainy morning, a Europe in which empire and forest would for centuries stand in uneasy counterpoint. History remembers the grand victories and the great defeats, but sometimes it remembers a single night of rain, a river of mud, and the choices of men who stood where trees met the sky. The Teutoburg Forest did more than drown legions, it carved the shape of a continent. And in the hush that follows the thunder, the forest keeps their names as all living places do, not in stone or list, but in the slow language of roots and rain. This was a defeat that reshaped an empire, and in doing so reshaped history.